Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to another Midrash Rabbah with Rabbi Q from After His Heart Ministries. We are a Hebrew roots ministry. Today we are going to talk about how a man can outlive his father. Okay, so we are going to, how a man can be older than his father. That's what we're going to do. Okay, so anyways, to begin with, however, we are going to just kind of discuss something that came up last week, and I said that we would carry it over today. Of course, last week we had some family health issues, and so we decided not to actually broadcast the Midrash. But today we're back in good health and we are going to move forward. So we will go ahead and get started. Basically, we'll spend the first 90 minutes of this broadcast discussing the ladder, Jacob's ladder, and that's from this week's Parasha Vayetze. And very specifically, it is going to be in Genesis chapter 24. And I'm sorry, not 24. Genesis chapter 28. Verse 10, I believe. Yeah, in verse 10, I believe it is. Okay, so is that where it starts? Verse 10? The parasha?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So this is what it says. And I'm reading from the NASB 2.0. Then Jacob departed from Beersheba and went toward Haran. And he happened upon a particular place and spent the night there because the sun had set. And he took one of the stones of the place and made it a support for his head and lay down in that place. And he had a dream, and behold, a ladder was set upon the earth with its top reaching to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. Then behold, Yahweh was standing above it and said, I am Yahweh, the Elohim of your father Abraham and Isaac, and the land on which you lie I will give to your descendants. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And in you and in your descendants shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Then Yaakov awoke from his sleep and said, Yahweh is certainly in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of Elohim, and this is the gate of Hashamayim. Okay, so I'll just keep reading. So Jacob got up early in the morning and took the stone that he had placed as a support for his head and set it up as a memorial stone and poured oil on its top. He named that place Bethel, but previously the name of the city had been Luz. Yaakov also made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and keep me on this journey that I will take and give me food to eat and garments to wear. That I will take and give me food to eat and garments to wear. And I returned to my father's house in safety, then Yahweh will be my Elohim. And this stone, which I have set up as a memorial stone, will be Elohim's house. And of everything that you give me, I will assuredly give a tenth to you. Okay. So I think probably what we're going to do is just, Mom, you go ahead and speak. And of course, she's going to probably be speaking on Alan's phone, but go ahead.
Okay. 2 weeks ago, I was I believe in Michael the Archangel. And I believe he's very strongly with us and protects us.
Okay.
So when I think of Michael the Archangel, I think of an ark,
Uh-huh.
like a promise. But I also think of his sword and how he would wield his sword. So I wield the sword like a curve. And then one day I said, oh, what if I did it the other way? And all of a sudden DNA came to me. And so I was talking to my friend Sandra D, and I told her that I think that the sword is touching DNA, which is us, of course. So in that, it came up. I said, pull it up and see what DNA looks like. And she pulled it up, and I said, oh my God, it looks like a ladder, Jacob's ladder. And that's how I came up with DNA is Jacob's ladder.
Okay. Okay. So let's set
Wait a minute,
aside.
there's a little bit more.
Okay, go ahead.
In the Tanakh, it talks about the father standing next to Jacob,
Okay.
which is more than him standing at the top of the ladder, even.
That's where?
In the Tanakh.
Genesis 28, verse 13. Then suddenly Adonai was standing there next to him, and he said,
Okay, so when you say Tanakh, Mom, are you talking about the JPS Tanakh? Which
Yes,
publisher is it?
JPS.
Is it
JPS.
JPS? Okay. And then of course Deborah is using the Complete Jewish, which I think follows the interpretation of the JPS with the exception of the New Testament. So JPS, the Jewish Publication Society, generally accepted moral or not moral, majority Jewish text. In other words, if you have a JPS, you pretty much got the best interpretation you could get in English. However, even the Jewish Publication Society will say, look, we're not English, we are Hebrew, and therefore you cannot translate from Hebrew to English, but this is the best we can give you, right? But it's not a Christian source, which is different for most people, right? It's a different kind of it's a different kind of interpretation. It's not like Zondervan or NASB or something like that. Okay. All right. So there's a couple things that I want to do. The first one is let's establish some authorities here. So authority number one, flat out 100% is the authority of Torah. Now, I recently had a live TikTok where only one person showed up. And what was interesting is I invited them on stage. And even though they were the only person there, we had an amazing conversation about the authority of the Word of God. Now, his screen name was Primera Scriptura, which means scripture first. I loved that premise, but I wanted to establish what I believed to be the authority of scripture versus the base versus all of the things that are built off of that foundation. So, for example, in Joshua chapter 1, verse 8, it says, this book of the law shall not depart from your mouth. You shall meditate upon it day and night, for in doing it, you shall have success. This is Joshua speaking to the people of Israel, right? The children of Israel after Moses' death. So this is what I want you to think about. What was the book of the law that Joshua was speaking of? It was the 5 books of Moses, or Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, or Bereshit, Shemot, Vayikra, Bamidbar, Devarim. Okay? That forms the Torah. There is no other books from ancient times included in the compendium of Torah. Okay? So Torah is ultimately for the Jewish people the foundation of any other book in their Bible. Okay, so let's talk a minute about their Bible. The most, or the earliest connection to a canon is the Septuagint. But let me explain that is only from an external Jewish, extra Jewish or not Jewish sources. In other words, if we historically accept, if we accept from a historian's point of view what is considered to be the ultimate Jewish canon, the Septuagint is the ultimate Jewish canon. However, the JPS Tanakh does not include the books that the ultimate Jewish canon included, and there are reasons for that. However, the Septuagint predates the JPS Tanakh, and the Septuagint predates the Masoretic texts. Now, there are a few reasons why that is important. Number one, notice I said extra Jewish or outside of the Jewish faith. Number two, I said that the JPS Tanakh does not contain the books that the Septuagint does. In other words, the apocryphal books that are included in the Catholic canon actually are what's in the Septuagint. There's a reason for that. The reason I'm getting into this is because you need to understand that from ancient times, there was only one set of books that was considered the authority. Okay? The reason I bring this up is because we need to make sure we understand that Torah sits outside of Revelation. And when I say Revelation, I mean when you experience a inspirational intuition about Torah, consider it a lie compared to Torah. Now be careful. I didn't say you were a liar. What I said is that's how much more authority Torah has than your own word and your own revelations and your own speech and your own opinions about Torah. Meaning what? Meaning that we treat the interpretation of Torah with extreme prejudice and reverence. What do I mean by extreme prejudice? That we are skeptical until we can't be about an external source to Torah, including Joshua, Judges, Ruth, Samuel, Kings, Chronicles, right? All the way through the prophets. What do the prophets actually say? They say, you're violating Torah. This is what's going to happen. And that's that. What does history tell us? It happened. So a violation of Torah is what the prophets talk about. What does David write about? The special relationship between him and Yahweh and the Torah as a guide. What does Joshua say? If you all will meditate upon what these 5 books say, you will have success. Not Luke, not James, not Malachi, but those 5 books that Joshua set before the children of Israel. And the Jews reverence that correctly, as did Yeshua, as did Paul, as did Peter, as does I, as does Deborah, as does Mom. Now, the reason this is important is because an authority of that magnitude needs to have objective interpretation. Even when we are speculatively midrashing, let me explain. Midrash is when we say, well, what if that symbol actually represented this? What would happen to that verse? That is Midrash Rabbah. Now, the first Midrash Rabbah was done by rabbis during Paul's time. The second Midrash Rabbah 2.0 is us, who have something new to bring to the table. And what is that? We have Yeshua. So this may or may not be the great Midrash of 2025, but I can tell you that the premise is the same. We will interpret Torah with Torah, not anything external to Torah. So that being the case, Mom, as a member of the Midrash Rabbah, a member of the great Midrash, brings to the table and says, I believe that the ladder of Yaakov, or what's called the Sulam, which I'll discuss that in just a moment, is DNA. And she went on to express that it was curse or generational curse, or that it was generational, but we kind of straightened that out last week. But there is an element that we definitely need to discuss in all this, but there's so much more in this. And if you were a scholar dedicated to Torah and the study thereof, you will find yourself in the other objective books. I'm sorry, maybe I should call them subjective in honor of Torah. In the other subjective books, we find interpretations and discussions about these verses. But there's something you need to know before we go any further. And that is that there are 4 words in Hebrew that the rabbis will say no one knows what they mean. The first one is tohu. The second is bohu. The third is sulam. And the final one is it just came up last week. Did it come up last week? Okay, you know what? I can't remember it. But those 3 alone are good enough, big enough, right? Okay, so what's bohu? Void. Interpreted in English as void. And for those of you who can brave through the horrible video production of Genesis in the Image of God Part 1, there was a reason why you guys didn't get the other 9 parts, is because it was really, really bad production quality, and we wanted to give you guys something a little bit better quality if we're going to be making the type of claims we made. But you should recall that in Genesis in the Image of God Part 1, there should have been a discussion about Tohu and Bohu, or maybe it was Part 2. Was it Part 2? Then it probably didn't get to you guys. Was it Part 2?
I don't remember.
You don't remember. Okay, that's okay. Anyways, point being is that Tohu and Bohu are void and without form, and Sulam is ladder. Those 3. The rabbis openly admit they have no idea what they are. They have no idea what it means. And if they are anti-Kabbalists, like if they are part of the Magid, then they'll just say, we don't know what it is. Kabbalists will say, it's this, right? And we love our Kabbalists. But I will say, if rabbis say they don't know what it is, then maybe you should take like a little marker and like a permanent marker and wipe across void without form and ladder. because that is part of the mistake of reading these verses in that way. Instantaneously, we think ladder, we think steps, and all of a sudden we've got an image of something that goes up, and we've got an image of something that has rungs on it. It really messes with the text. So we're approaching this objectively. We start with, it's not a ladder. Then what we need to do is actually work through what the rest of the verse indicates. Okay. I think one of the more important things that I need to say here is that I'm not right now. It may appear that I am critiquing or that I am saying that Mom is wrong. I'm not. What we're going to do is approach this objectively. And if at the end of that, we can still draw upon that Midrash, because that's what Mom is doing here. She's saying, well, this symbol represents this, and therefore let's study the verse with this symbol in place. We can do that, but let's objectively try to figure out what is actually happening here. Okay. So, the first thing that we should probably do is ask the people who are on Zoom, and of course, Deborah is here with me now, if they have any input to add to Mom's stuff that may or may not help us to clarify more of the verse, and then we'll get into the verse itself.
I do have a lot, but I want to see if anybody else.
Okay, so let me go ahead and look on here and see if somebody unmutes, and we'll go from there. Paul K., did you have something?
I did. I had a question. So Sulam is ladder LA Delta Delta Echo Romeo, right?
Yes.
Not the LA Tango Tango.
Correct.
ER. Okay.
Yep.
Gotcha. I'm good there.
Something that you climb. Yep. Mm-hmm. Sure. Okay. All right. Anybody else? Let me check the YouTube channel and make sure that nobody has asked any questions in the comments, because of course, we are broadcasting live to YouTube, and this particular live, I want to make sure that nobody has asked any questions, and it looks like we're good. Yeah. All right. So, go ahead.
So I have several points that will that make me believe that it possibly could be DNA.
Okay.
Number one, angels is Malak, right? And I checked it. It definitely is Malak. It's not a different word. And the first usage of that word is messenger, right? So this ladder type of thing was covered with messengers.
Okay.
Okay. Mm-hmm. We also can see that our DNA literally is messages that are passed down throughout our generations on how to construct the body, or what color eyes your mom has, maybe what color you have, and that's messages that are sent down throughout the generations. We also see that as soon as Adonai starts talking to him, he says that I am the God of your grandfather and the God of your father, and I will give you this land to your descendants. So he automatically starts immediately talking about Jacob's lineage, the descendants of Jacob. And your generations will be as numerous as the dust of the earth. So he's I think that the the ladder extending up to quote unquote the heavens, to the highest of heights, showed his lineage extension, the extension of his lineage. So I pulled several of those things and saw that very well could possibly be some type of DNA and him, because one of the things that he showed Abraham was that Abraham said, or God said, look at the stars, and that's how many descendants you're going to have. Look at the sands of the shore, and that's how many descendants you're going to have. And it would make sense to me that he's showing his lineage to Jacob, because he's already used the dust of the earth and the stars in the sky, to Abraham, and trying to communicate something to someone else. It would make sense to me that he was showing him his lineage.
Okay.
I have
Anybody want?
something else.
Okay, go ahead.
I was thinking about how when they say Abraham, and then it would talk about all that were represented in his family. And there's a lot of books like that say, and this one begat this one, and this one begat that one. And that's another thing that connected me, that I was thinking about yesterday, that it's DNA lineage.
Okay.
So it is kind of what Deborah was talking about too.
Okay. Okay. So, when we're looking at this, a couple things that I want you to think about. First of all, I think everybody who's here would agree with me that if we do know the philosophy of those ancient peoples, and or the belief system of those ancient peoples, we probably have a lot of information we are missing. And I'm going to propose to you that is going to become very, very important. Now, Deb talked about that there were messengers on the ladders, and she said the first usage of angel, or the word angel, malach, is messenger. What is that first usage?
Oh, sorry.
No, you're fine.
Back to it.
You're talking about when Jacob sends messengers to Esau?
Yes.
Okay. So, and I assumed that's what she was going to say. So let's talk a minute about angels. Let's get that one straight first, okay? There is really no definitive description in the Bible itself of what angels look like. Okay. Now, having said that, I think it's important that I qualify that and say, okay, yes, that's true, but where do we get the winged kind of princely, stately looking male figures that we presume to be angels? Now, I'm going to tell you something. I have in my time seen some pretty amazing things. And the first time that I ever saw proof of an angel and perceived it to definitely be true was when I was working at a pregnancy resource center in another town. And there was this paper bag looking thing on the wall. I'm sorry, no, that's not right. There was this photograph on the wall, and it was of these stars, and it was a really strange photograph, and it caught my eye a number of times. And what we were doing is remodeling it for them. And we had already remodeled the bottom floor, and so that was kind of already being used. And so there was a receptionist sitting there, and I said, hey, I've walked by this picture 3 times, and there's something really peculiar about it. I said, I love the photograph of the stars. I've been an astronomer since I was 6 years old, blah, 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 blah. So then she goes, take it off the wall. I took it off the wall, and on the back of it, there is like a little clip thing holding what looks like a folded paper bag. And when you pull it out, it's actually a letter. And what the letter says is, I was taking a photograph of the moon. The moon was really beautiful that night. And when I developed the photos, this is what I saw. And so what it is it's transparency paper. It's not a paper bag. And you take the transparency paper and you lay it over the photograph, and it's this huge angel, as us Christians would have understood it. And it is got like this crown on its head, and it's got these wings. And when you look, its hand is outstretched, and down in the corners, this mangled, swirly mess in the picture, like it didn't develop correctly there. It goes on to explain that the person who took the photograph believes that they saw something in the form of spiritual warfare happening right there in front of their eyes. Now, this is what I'm going to say. There are evidences of things like, for example, huge fingerprints on a car when a car was on a train track and it stalled and the people couldn't get out of the car. There's a number of other things. For example, somebody saw an angel wrestle a tornado away from their home. So let's start at the beginning and ask some questions. Number one, if our God is remember the Jacob and the well, remember the woman in the well with Yeshua at Jacob's well, right? And how he says that that God is spirit, and that people would worship in spirit and truth, and it basically indicates that God is not of any form. Okay. And then I've gone on to say, look, guys, in my filter of who my creator is, he can't be as frail and as vulnerable as a human to me. If he is, then he's a puny God. He's got to be bigger than that, right? So if we put him at the highest point of creative energy, we lose the anthropomorphical symbols mentioned in scripture, like eyes of God, hands of God, ears of God, mouth of God. None of those exist. Those are all symbolic processes for a human to understand what God is doing in that moment, okay? Or what I would call constructs. So the reason why this is important is because when we start to get into the supernatural realm, which would be a realm outside of our field of vision, outside of our spectrum of hearing. Spectrum, that's probably not good. Let's say range of hearing, and outside of our physical height, width, depth, time perception. Okay. The reason that's important is because when we start to get into the form of things appearing to be human, we have a problem. Okay. Now remember, I saw that photograph and I saw with my eyes what that person perceived, and it fit the Christian description of angels. The problem is where we get the idea that they have wings, or we get the idea that they have harps, or we get the idea that they have crowns, or we get the idea that they are all dressed in white, or that they have feet, or whatever, is a misinterpretation of anthropomorphical symbols representing processes of energy. And what I mean by that is that God doesn't have eyes. So his sight is his observation as a consciousness, is definitely not about rods and cones, and definitely not about the observation of wavelengths, of color, and differentiations of those. But instead, when we see like, for example, we see the name or the word Berha lo Arai, what we are seeing is not the God who sees in the sense of observing, but instead that she was recognized, even though that she was an Egyptian pagan, she was recognized by the God of Abraham that touched her. And so she named that place, right? Okay. So why is this important? Because when we get into the Septuagint, and that's why I brought up the Septuagint today, we get into the Greek word euangulon. Okay? And that is the Greek word for messenger or message. Okay? It is also the word that is translated in the Greek in the New Testament from Koine Greek to English as gospel. Euangulon is the good news. Euangulon has a derivative word. If euangulon is message, then the derivative word angelos is messenger, the carrier of the message, which we see angelos translated from Greek, Koine Greek to English as angel. So now we take all of that New Testament knowledge and we superimpose it upon the Greek Old Testament called the Septuagint. And this story says angelos. And so what did they do? They interpreted it as angel from Greek to English. Why did they do that? Because a majority of the American Christian English-speaking Protestant or Catholic translators are not trusting the word malach, but the word angelos. And truth be told is that didn't change until 1948. And in 1948, they discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls and found a Tanakh that predated Septuagint. And all of a sudden they had to change all of their hermeneutical interpretations and had to really kind of get down and dirty. And what they found is that there was a lot of things they were going to need to correct. And so they decided to leave a bunch of them the same. In fact, the King James Version of the Bible uses the Septuagint as the authoritative text for all of the Bible. Meaning that the Septuagint overrides the Jewish Masoretic text out of anti-Semitism alone. The Jews can't be trusted. Why is this important? Because malach is a very different word than angelos. Let me explain. Whereas angelos is more like the context of a messenger in the sense of somebody who carries a message from one person to another person. Malach does not mean messenger. Malach means agent. And there is a big difference between an agent and a messenger. Anybody want to take a wild guess so that I'm not the only one talking? Who or what an agent is versus what a messenger is?
A messenger would have no authority. An agent has the authority.
Okay. So let me give you an example. Let's say that I own a corporation and I am currently trying to Mom, did you have something?
I did.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
I wanted to bring up the time my sister and I were in the ocean.
Okay, but not
And-
yet. Not yet,
But-
because you're
but it's
interrupting my
important
current
because
point.
it's the
You're
thing
interrupting my
between
current point. So we'll
agent-
wait on this.
Agent and messenger.
I know, but we'll wait on this. Okay.
Okay.
Because I know that story, and that story is very important to this. But I want to establish the difference between an agent and a messenger.
Okay.
I know the story enough to know where it's going to fall in relevant to what we're talking about. Okay. So I own a corporation, and let's say that somebody is trying to sue my corporation. Okay. So I could go into court myself and represent myself and hope to know the law sufficient enough to keep myself from being sued because I want to not be sued, right? It's not a situation where I say, oh, yeah, you know what? My bad. Let me compensate you for that problem. Here is your compensation. I don't want to be sued, so I'm going to go to court. Now, what's important is I don't call FedEx to go in and sit down in front of the judge with me, do I? Because that's a courier, right? That's a messenger. That's what a messenger is a delivery service. That's it. Okay. Whereas an agent, in fact, is somebody who actually says they are me and operate as me in proxy. In other words, they take upon themselves me and then speak as me, for me, and in front of the judge. We don't call FedEx for that. We call, the biggest law firm in New York City. We don't call FedEx. So that's how I want you to think about the difference here. Okay. Is there's a difference between somebody who actually poses as me with my permission, otherwise that's identity theft, as opposed to somebody who just delivers a message. Okay. Because you have to be careful, because it can be given the impression that all angels do is deliver messages. And I would like to make sure that we are clear and that's not true. Okay, Mom, tell your story.
Okay. My sister and I were in the ocean. I was 14, she was 12. And an undercurrent was pulling us under.
This is in
and
Ocean City, right?
Ocean City,
Mhm.
New Jersey. And when we were going under, all of a sudden, this huge man came and took me under one arm and my sister under the other arm, brought us to the land, and disappeared. I would call that a messenger, I guess a messenger, because they were, I don't know exactly how to explain that. First, I thought it was an agent, but I think it's a messenger because they were sent to take care of a situation.
Mhm. Okay. Okay.
And there was one more thing. Rosie said she saw him in the restaurant we were in, but
Right.
I
Yeah.
didn't.
You told me about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So go ahead and tell that part of the story. I think it's important.
Okay. Rosie told me, she said, before he came to us, she saw him in a restaurant that we were in
Before he rescued you.
before he rescued us.
Mm-hmm.
But I never saw him.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So one of the things that we can say is that with that story and my story and many other stories, we have an anthropomorphic being in a state of supernatural abilities performing protections on behalf of humans. Now, it is important to understand that the word ma'ak does not indicate that kind of operation. Let me explain. So the Hebrew word lach, okay, or lech from lech lecha, right, means to walk. Halak actually is the full word meaning to walk, but lach means to go, right? Halak or halakha is the walk or a walk, okay? Melech is the mighty one who walks among the people, right? Or the mighty one who walks. Malach is the agent of the mighty one. In other words, all of who I am in my capacity as a decision maker, as a procurer of properties, real and private, or real and personal, is then granted as a facsimile upon an agent. Meaning what? A malach is actually the image and the agency of God, but not the essence of the creator. And what I mean by that is the intensity is not the same, but they definitely are super, right? They're higher, or they are at least in position of highness. They are super visual, super tactile, and super audible, meaning they are above sight, above hearing, and above feeling. Yet, many have experienced these beings present during crisis, and specifically during life-threatening processes. Now, the reason I say that this is important is because we either interpret the word as messenger or we interpret it as agent. And here's the problem, is that if we try to differentiate, we are violating how the Hebrew language works. The Hebrew language is designed around symbols that fit together to make stories. And the malach is an agent of business, having the signet ring, having the representation of business to negotiate, to procure, to sell, to accumulate wealth, to disseminate wealth. They are a power of attorney. And they're not a limited, per se, power of attorney. They have full authority as God to be in operation in that moment. The limitation would probably come from the point of view of how much of the creator they actually are. But we do get into something very interesting here. And that is, what if it is very evidenced that it is a human that is present? Like, what if it says, oh, messengers came from David, or David sent messengers to this king or whatever, and when he sent them to them, they were stripped of their dignity, right? Remember, they shaved half their beards and cut half of their robes so that their buttocks were exposed. Do you remember that? So in principle, then, were those angels? Right? So we have challenges. And I could tell you, Mom, when you say that your sister saw a man in a restaurant and you didn't, does not mean that it wasn't a man. And then going a step further, for somebody to be, 12 and 14 years old, there's a good possibility that a larger human being would appear very large, especially in a situation where they were being rescued. However, that doesn't diminish, in my mind, the possibility of an angel. The problem is that that's not even really what they're supposed to be called. And in addition to that, there seems to be more to the subject than we can really get into, per se, today. Now, I allotted 90 minutes for this. We have about half an hour left. I want to kind of get into now this concept of a ladder. Okay. So two things. Number one, on the one side, we have what we would call subjective information here. And what I mean by that is that it's very possible that there's a confirmation bias. What confirmation bias could I be speaking of here? Now, I want you guys to know, I'm just going to make something clear. I am not being objective and skeptical because it is my mother. I am being objective and skeptical because I'm trying to teach you all how to do this correctly.
Well,
right?
I want to interject something.
Okay, go ahead.
This is a dream that Jacob is having, right? And we understand that dreams are always messages of subconscious process.
Absolutely true.
Right? And they are never exactly what it seems to be. Right?
Right.
You dream of, I don't know, a father figure, right? It doesn't mean that it's, you dream of your father, right? And it doesn't mean that your father is doing whatever in the dream or the relationship that you have with your father. It is always about more of
the symbol or the meaning
of
a paternal or protective figure or something like that.
Right, exactly. So it's a message from your subconscious that is telling you XYZ.
Okay.
Right? Versus
right.
So when we look at the ladder, this is a symbol of something, not
right. Okay. Yes. And I think Deb makes a really good point, and I think this is really going to actually help this a little bit here. And that is that, yes, it is a dream, but it's very important for you guys to know that when you have, so there are three types of dreams. There is psychological processing of the day or your current life stresses. There is metaphysical, which is a combination of both, where basically the supernatural and the physical are involved. So it's a psychological / spiritual dream. And then there's an absolutely spiritual, or what we would probably in this day and age mistakenly call a prophetic dream. Okay. Where basically you have connected in with the Neum, but now you've gone into a deep dream state, and whatever's going on in that is somehow linked into either a future events or potentials or all kinds of things. But yes, Deborah brings up some very important points. Number one is that a dream is the subconscious speaking, and the subconscious does not speak any earthly languages. The subconscious speaks symbol. But you need to also know that if it is a dream communicated from a higher realm, we probably don't actually know what it is. And so our mind, our subconscious mind, creates constructs that look like things that we can relate to. It operates within our frames of reference. You'll never dream about something you've never seen before. You will always say, it was kind of like this. It looked like this. It had this appearance. We will always take our frames of references. That's why when you're younger, your dreams will be more connected to your cartoons that you watch or to your family experiences than they would be to a whole bunch of other information. So all of a sudden Mickey Mouse is kicking in your dream and you don't understand why, because your subconscious has taken information and tweaked it into something that you can relate to. That's how our brains work. It generalizes, it deletes, and it distorts. So it takes information it doesn't understand and makes it work. Okay. All right. So why is that important? Because again, we don't know what the word Sulam means, which means we don't know what Jacob's frame of reference was for this thing. Okay. But it wasn't a ladder. Now, the next thing that we need to accept is that we don't know how or why he thought that they were Malak, how or why he thought that they were agents. Okay. Then, of course, what do we have? We have going up and going down. Now, there's a couple things that I would like to say about that in terms of direction. A, Hebrew up and down are very different from English up and down. The English language has established through the Greek language a higher limit that is vertical and is perpendicular to our lateral plane, right? And then also something that is the lower limit that is vertical, that is perpendicular to our lateral plane. What I'm saying is within space, we have an up and down. It is a very inappropriate interpretation because we're actually standing on the side of the ball straight out, right? Gravity is holding us against the side of a sphere. Unless you're a flat earther, then gravity is holding you on the side of a disc that is turned sideways, because regardless, the orientation of the rest of the location of the luminaries indicates that we are on our side. In fact, there are actually some flat earthers who believe we're upside down. And they have explanations why they believe that. Anyways, all that to say, up is not up and down is not down. They mean something different. in terms of direction and instead need to be more interpreted in terms of magnitude or intensity. So we are not talking about seeing a ladder somewhere in Israel with angels climbing it and coming down on it. We are talking about something we don't understand with beings we don't understand intensifying, or lack of better words, diminishing. Okay? That's just how it is. There is actually no evidence in anthropomorphical or archaeological digs and or studies of civilizations through the examination of ancient texts that indicates that there was a belief in the word Allah, meaning up. I'm sorry, Ola, or Allah, but not how you would think of it because of our experience as Americans with the Muslim faith. The Hebrew word Allah means to go up. However, there is not a whole lot of geographical ascension in Israel. Okay? And there definitely isn't geographical ascension in Israel in some of the places where it talks about going up. In other words, there wasn't a change in elevation in those verses. There's also an impossibility. For example, whether we accept the mountain in Arabia called El Jebel as Mount Sinai or Horeb, or we accept the mountain in the Egyptian peninsula that we call the Sinai Peninsula as being the mountain, there is no way that Moses could have ascended as a human, that Moses could have ascended and descended from the top to the base 3 times in one day. So however we accept it, ascension and descension do not seem to have anything to do with movement vertically. Okay? Now, there's enough of a contradiction in that thought process that not only will I be right no matter how you investigate it, but also, if that be true, then there are verses contradicting locations of cities. Like what up actually means. If this city is located here and this city is located here, how in the world is it up? Because that city's higher than that city. Okay. So I think it's very important that we remember that we are dealing with a supernatural being, B, that we are supernatural beings, not human beings. We are human shells having a spiritual experience, right? But we are actually spiritual beings having a human experience. In other words, we have descended or diminished in intensity in order to become what we are in terms of who we were before. That's important. Because you need to remember that even as a Christian, you believed that a soul was eternal. It either went to heaven or it went to hell. So you've already established that a soul lives long beyond the human body. Well, if your soul exists from the day of your birth until the day of your death as a decision maker / connector to heaven, then we need to accept that there's probably a lot more to this verse than just a physical scientific interpretation. Now, having said that, I want to say that I believe that there is the potential, and I'm being very skeptical here, confirmation bias, that you were told, Mom, that it was a ladder. And then you see a picture of DNA and you see a ladder. And those two are very similar, and that's what your mind can do. However, I also believe that there is a potential here that the agency that was involved could be indicative of a revelation, for lack of better words, an exposure. Revelation means exposure, right? Apocalypsis in the Hebrew means to uncover and show, right? So this is the uncovering. And the uncovering here is that Yaakov could have very easily been observing the future of his generations. So we need to kind of look at some other texts to see whether that be true, but I'm going to propose to you that there's one part in this little story that probably is going to make it be something else completely, and that is that Yahweh himself is standing at the top of the ladder, and that it says that the angels were ascending and descending from earth to heaven, right? The ladder reached from earth to heaven. Is that how the text reads? Let's take a look. Yeah, he had a dream, and behold, a ladder was set upon the earth with its top reaching the heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. Okay, so first of all, we need to establish something very, very important here. Okay, and that is that the word Hashamayim is not, nor ever will be, sky. Okay. Now, the ancients believed that the heavens, Hashamayim, were vertically above them, right? And this is where a lot of flat earthers say that the heavens are actually outside of the dome. Okay. And so the heavens indicate anything outside of the dome, which would be, I guess, up for everyone, because the dome itself goes up. There's a belief that all of the land mass is in the center of the circle of the flat disk, and all of the oceans are on the exterior of the flat disk, so that we could never access the dome. And we can never go up to access the dome because of how high it is, but also because there will be some sort of intervention to prevent that from happening. Which is where they say, oh, well, NASA's lying. Look, we have proof because of the lunar landing and all that kind of stuff. But my point is that the ancients believed that the heavens were up. Okay. However, that's not the word they use for up. And I'm just going to propose to you when it says that it was set upon the earth and its tops were reaching to heaven, right? That we are not dealing with and this is where I would bring the midrashic debate, that it is not DNA, but that doesn't mean that it's not DNA. What I've done is I've said, okay, first of all, angels aren't what you think they are. Ladder's not what you think they are. So let's see if we can recalibrate here. But does that mean that Jacob didn't see his descendants, his future? Not denying that at all. And that is kind of where Mom and Deborah have leaned. But here's the part that I'm going to propose to you guys that we really get our heads wrapped around, and that is if anyone would agree with me that Hashamayim is not in this physical realm, and that earth is in this physical realm, then we have a portal between heaven and earth, an access point. And I propose to you that that access point is not vertical. Any thoughts?
Well, I mean, I can understand it possibly also being some kind of access point or in between the two realms, heaven and earth, between the physical and the spiritual, right? The only thing that I would question about that is if Yahweh was at the end of the ladder in the spiritual realm, or whether he's right next to Jacob. Either way, how was Jacob, quote unquote, seeing him if this is if it's an energy, right?
Yes, and I am glad that that was brought up, because I can tell you that some of the reason for me challenging this the way it is because I want to make a proposal. But before I do, I want to argue some points. Number one, Jacob later in the next parasha is going to wrestle something, right? And whatever that something is that he wrestles, he then has something very interesting happen, and is this: he has the entity who he wrestles name him Israel. But then later on, he actually is given the name Israel at a different time. And we'll get into that. But the point being is that an agent would be the only one who could give him the name. And that's important. But it is also, I mean, God could be, but you need to think of God as too big to be communicating with us personally. Okay. That's one of the things you need to get in your head, is that the intensification of all power in the universe to send a message to you has to dummy it down, or it'll make your head explode. That's how you want to think about it. You want to think about, if we were to take and hook a line from the high tension, high power lines, let's say we turn them off for a second, and then we hook that line directly into your house, what is going to happen to your house? It will literally disintegrate. The actual ionic bond chemical reactions and the covalent bond chemical reactions that hold things together become diminished in their ability to do so. And poof, atoms just fly apart. Atomized human right in front of everybody, right? That's what it would be. It would be atomized house. So what's my point? We need a transformer. And what's interesting about a transformer is that there is no actual contact between this wire and this wire. There's a gap, and that gap is what keeps everything safe. And that's why I don't have my power. I usually have my power brick over here. That's why I could take my power brick and show you that that thing is taking 110 volts and dumbing it down into 1.5 to 5 volts by creating that gap between the power and the new power. Okay. So let's get some things straight here. If he saw Yahweh there are some things that we need to necessarily get into. And that is that sight is not what we think it is in the scripture, in the Bible. That the sight that's being spoken of about these patriarchs is not rods and cones. Okay. And where we really, really get into this is when God appears to Abraham and speaks. Right? Now, having said that, we need to get into another element here, and that is that if there is a supernatural sight, do we have it today? Can we have it today? And is what Jacob saw something we will never actually get to see? Okay, so that's number one, is are we dealing with something that we don't understand and therefore we need to be very careful with, right? Okay. Answer is we better be careful because it's Torah. And we don't interpret Torah lightly. So now let's talk a minute about Mom's claim that it's DNA. Setting aside the revelation, because that is not authoritative. And I'm not saying that it didn't happen. I'm saying that it's not what we can back this up with, right? However, what we can do is ask other questions. For example, if it is DNA, what have we learned about DNA? We know that from DNA, we have established that we came from one female and one male initially. That is evidenced in our DNA, confirming the Adam and Eve story. However incestuous it is for humanity to propagate itself, however incestuous that was in the eyes of atheists, we definitely DNA from one female and one male. What else do we have in our DNA? We have evidence of a bottleneck where there were millions and millions and millions of people, and it diminishes in our DNA information down to maybe 16 people. And then all of a sudden it comes back out and starts getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Now we're bigger than the original. So it's not an hourglass. It's not equal. It doesn't go, it goes, right? Okay. So that's important. What else do we have? What new things have we discovered about DNA? Diseases are actually passed. Let's talk about this for a minute. Okay. Diseases. Let's think about a disease that might affect, say, I don't know, childbirth. Okay. There is a disease out there. Can't remember the name of it right now, and it probably wouldn't even matter if I had the name because you guys would not understand what it was. That prevents the proteins from the sperm to activate the egg's acceptance. And so a child will, the egg will be fertilized and everything will go the way it's supposed to, but it will always result in a stillborn. I can't remember the name of the disease, but I can tell you it's genetic, passed from mother to mother to mother to mother to mother. In this parasha, we have proof that somehow, some way, Yahweh controls the opening or closing of the womb. Now, there's a lot of intrigue to this thought process, because then we have the first real true context of epigenetics, where we can identify traumatic information in our genetics from a time when our ancestors experienced it, almost indicating that we have carried with us the debt of another's sin against us from generation to generation. Now, I could tell you, as a neurolinguistic programming practitioner, I have a technique known as timeline, and it is actually designed to help people heal from things and information that may have predated their birth. And I can tell you it's a psychological system. It is not, hasn't have anything to do with their DNA. But the person who came up with the science, actually, one of their clients had somebody who committed adultery 40 generations before them, and so they were not able to be successful in business. Now, there's a whole lot that goes into how that regression occurred and what information came out, but in the end, it was all information that was generational. So here's an interesting thought, and I'm just going to propose this, that if we accept that we can imprint that information, very important information in some cases, can be imprinted upon the next generation through DNA, then there's a number of things, in fact, 3 that I find really important. Number 1 is, what knowledge do you have that you need to have that you don't have, that is actually within you about God? Number 2, what skills do you possess that you don't know you possess because of the information contained in your DNA from the generations who had the skill? And number 3, what darkness do you carry with you that is imprinted upon your DNA that is actually the result of that epigenetics concept? Because then what we get into is that perhaps Mom and Deborah are right. Perhaps DNA is partially on this earth and partially not on this earth. And that there is a connection between the supernatural DNA and the natural DNA. And perhaps maybe our DNA has told us to not be spiritual anymore because of how dark humanity became. Perhaps we don't have the connection to Hashemayim anymore. So, as you can see, that is how you explore and don't just simply accept interpretation of Torah. No amount of confirmation can sufficiently confirm that our revelations are true or not true. However, there is built into us an intuition where we hear our shepherd's voice, where we gain a feeling of witness. Mom experienced that in her vision. Is it subjective? Absolutely it is. Does it need skepticism? Absolutely it does. Confirmation bias is a very, very powerful, manipulative tool of the ego. However, we have interesting discussions stemming from this particular interpretation. Because then we get into, what did Jacob see? Was it normal for a human to know exactly what all those things were? How did Jacob know it was angels? How did Jacob know it was a ladder? If it was a dream, he has constructs, which means whatever those objects were, he had seen them in real life. And his brain was making the references. You can't know what things are that you see in a dream that are not relatable.
Mm-hmm.
You would say they look like, or they kind of looked like, right?
I think he could have possibly seen Yeshua's day as well.
Mm.
If he was seeing his generations, if I'm using that strongly, if he was seeing his generations, he could have seen how his generations would have led to Yeshua.
Agreed. So,
and that itself would have been a portal.
We have about 2 minutes, so I just want to summarize real quick, and then we're going to take a little break. Is it plausible that it was DNA? Is it plausible that what Jacob saw was all of the information that had already happened because he had a direct connection in with the divine, and that direct connection wasn't because he was somehow unconditionally chosen, but because he had tapped into it? Yes, absolutely plausible. However, it is very important that you realize that that's one of many interpretations, and Torah was not designed to be singular in its interpretation the way Christianity thinks that it is. There's an irony to the fact that we as Christians, when we were Christians and not what we are today, where we are Hebrews, and that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, not humans trying to connect to God, that we actually our connection and our process is subjective. And what I mean by that is we'll use a Bible reading schedule, right? We'll say, okay, today I'm turning to Malachi chapter 4, and it's the middle of May, right? It's and the context of what I'm saying is that it's not in the right location for the parashas and the haftars and all that, but all of a sudden out of the middle of nowhere, Malachi chapter 4 just so happens to be exactly what I'm going through with my business partner right now. And it makes sense. This is exactly the story, blah, 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 blah. And yet we can't accept that means there's more than one facet of the diamond. So do we accept that it is DNA? Of course we do. Why? Because why not? Right? However, it begs the question, what else is in our DNA that we don't understand? And then I'm just going to take it a step further and say, we've learned how to modify DNA to subjectively change objective natural order processes, GMOs, right? What else does that mean?
Selection.
Right. What else does that mean for a supernatural DNA to have not only the concept of a repair, but that we could modify it? And if it happens in the supernatural, according to Paul, it happens in the natural first. In other words, if we were to modify our DNA, say with a vaccine, what have we done to the supernatural realm? Okay, let's take our break. For those of you who are not going to join us in the second session, Shabbat Shalom. For those of you who are joining us in the second session, we will see you in a little